Sahel region. So this middle kind of strip going right through Central Africa. So from West Africa over to East Africa, right through the middle here. So these right here are the countries that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so the people. So obviously the Sahel extends from Senegal all the way over to Sudan. It spans across the entire continent, east or west to east or east to west, across Africa. There's a lot of different ethnicities in this area. For example, in Chad, there's more than 100. They are influenced by several different people because they're right in the middle. So they have Arab influences, European influences, obviously, because the European are going to colonize most of this, and also the indigenous cultures that already existed there before the European colonization. So major ethnic groups that are in this, the Mande, who those guys are in Senegal and Mali. The Wolofs, those are in Senegal, and then the Hausa people are in Niger. And then the Fulani, this is the largest ethnic group of nomadic herders that live in this region. But the Berbers also live there. Remember, they're a nomadic group as well, but they don't have as large of a population in the Sahel region as they do farther north in the North Africa region. Okay, so the Hausa used to be traders, but now they were more agricultural. The Fulani, they raised dairy cattle, and they were one of the first groups to actually adopt Islam. So Islam is very strong in the Sahel because obviously Islam not controls, but Islam is spread throughout most of North Africa, which we've talked about, down through the Sahel region, even a little bit south of that. Um, some people do defy the general Muslim classifications, even though Islam is strong in there. So, for example, Arabic is not the main language in some of these regions, okay, or in some of these places. So, they speak usually like an indigenous or what we'll talk about lingua franca, which means a common language. But many ethnic groups have maintained indigenous cultural practices as well. Okay, so history and government. So the first civilizations, around 2000 BC, people fleeing a dramatic shift in climate settled in the Sahel. And so basically, what was going on is there's desertification. So this right here is where the Sahara is, and it started to grow. Okay, it started to become hotter, and so the Sahara, even to this day, is continuing to grow. And so a lot of people started moving farther south, and they settled in this region, just south of the Sahara. Now, the Nile River Valley does remain fertile. Okay, it did give life to the Egyptian civilization. So I'm talking this region right in here, where the Kush lived, and the Kingdom of Kush, which is in present-day Sudan, eventually extended its rule into Egyptian territory, and they're going to push south along the Nile, and they're going to flourish until about the 300s, when the trade routes were attacked by the Axum people. So you can see in this map, this right here is Axum, and this is a trading empire in present-day Ethiopia. Okay. So several centuries later, trading empires gained strength in West Africa. So Ghana and then Mali and Songhai, those are going to be the three big empires in West Africa. So the Mali and Songhai empires grew rich from the gold for salt trade, and so they would have what they would do. So Timbuktu, which sits right here on the Niger River, is Mali's capital, and this became a major trade center, and it was a lot like if you think of Rome during the Renaissance. So it was not only a trade center, but it was also a center of learning. It was a capital. I mean, it was a political center, economic center. It was a booming city, and you can see it sits right on the river here. But what they would do to bring in goods to trade is the Berbers would have what are called camel caravans, and they would go take camels across the Sahara, and they would go get salt and bring it back and trade it for gold, and they would trade that way. But eventually Songhai took over Mali and expanded further east. So you can see on this map here, this is the original kingdom of Ghana, okay? And then Mali took over, this is the orange. And then Songhai took over all of this plus this yellow. Okay, so it extended even farther. And they prospered until about the 1600s, but eventually they're going to get overrun by the Moroccans. So this right here is Morocco. Okay, so the Europeans began trading as early as the 1200s with the Africans, but by the 16 and 1700s, they were trading extensively. And by the 1800s, European countries started to colonize Africa. And what they did is they basically carved up Africa, and they went and they took a map. It was at the Berlin conference. A bunch of European countries were there, and they basically went in and just took what they could. Okay, and the only two countries that are going to remain free are Ethiopia and Liberia. Okay, so Ethiopia, they ended up defeating the Italians who tried to take over them, and Liberia stayed free because they were protected by the U.S. We'll talk more about that in another set of notes, though. But when they went in, they wanted raw materials and they wanted new markets and they wanted just basically to expand their economies. And so they created boundaries that just did not take any kind of um, ethnic like cultural divisions into account. They didn't even take hardly any geographical divisions into account. So that's why there's a lot of really straight lines today in Africa, because those are geometric boundaries, especially if you look in like North Africa here. Okay, well, you don't see it in this map, but there's like straight lines that separate all these countries, because that's what the Europeans did. They just said, okay, I'll take this side of the line, you take that side of the line. And then that's how the countries were created. But because of that, they're going to set African groups against one another and strengthen European rule, because if the African groups are fighting one another, then they're not as concerned about what the Europeans are doing. So oftentimes, like if there's like a clan like here that didn't necessarily get along with a clan that lives here, well, they still live in this British controlled area, so they're going to have to figure out how to get along. Okay. So many Africans benefited from European rule. So there were some good things. There's a lot of bad things, but there were some good things about the Europeans coming in and colonizing. So one thing was better education. So they set up schools and things like that. Now the thing is they really taught them in the European ways. And one of these ideas that came up was this idea of nationalism. So nationalism is the idea that basically each ethnicity should have their own country. So these Africans are looking at these Europeans and they're saying, you guys shouldn't rule us, we should rule ourselves. And so by the mid 1900s, there was a lot of independence movements, so where a lot of these colonies became independent. So once these countries became independent, they did face a lot of difficulties. So, for example, the colonial powers didn't include Africans in the government, so they didn't really know how to run a government themselves. They didn't provide any kind of models for democracy because they basically ruled as a dictatorship. And at independence, many countries adopted boundaries that were set by the colonial powers, which included those ethnic groups that didn't necessarily get along. And so different ethnic groups would fight each other to gain power in their new country. And so this led to a lot of civil wars. So this right here this is a map that shows the new countries. You can see, and the lines look more similar to what we see today on the map, but you can see like there's a civil war going on in Chad. There was a civil war going on in Nigeria. You see Sudan, there was unrest there. So this is the region here we're talking about, Eritrea there, Djibouti there, okay? So all of that. Okay, so Sudan today, there's distinct cultural divisions that separate the North and South in Sudan. So in the North, they're more Arabic-speaking Muslims, and they are more urban. So they live in larger cities, and so they favor Islamic governments. In South Sudan, okay, so South Sudan is now a separate country. So this actually happened since I've made these notes, so that's why these notes are a little bit incorrect here. But in South Sudan, which is now a separate country, they're more rural areas. Okay, so they're focused on subsistence farming, and they practice a more secular type of government, which is closer to what we have than more of a theocratic government, which is what most Muslim countries have. But the western region of Darfur holds about 1.8 million displaced people. We're going to watch a video about this, and then I'll give you an update after we watch that video, kind of what's going on in Darfur today. But basically, there's a conflict between the agrarian, non Arab black African Muslims and the government backed militias. And so a lot of people have moved from Sudan into Chad, and there's a lot of refugee camps in Chad, and in this western region, Darfur is in Sudan. So this has led to deaths of tens of thousands and overcrowded refugee camps. There's about 250,000 nomads that are threatened as they try to avoid the conflict. They're trying to get away from it. They did sign a peace deal in 2005 that ended the conflict between North and South Sudan, and then eventually, like I said, they have separated now into Sudan and South Sudan as separate countries. But this peace deal did not address Darfur and what to do with that. So getting into culture, the arts, so African art often expresses traditional religious beliefs. This comes in many different forms. So you might see like ritual masks, to rhythmic drum music to folk tales. So visual arts would include like the ceremonial masks and the wooden figures of the Dogon people who are from Mali. Music is they have like a very like syncopated rhythms with the percussion. They use a lot of percussion, the talking drum, and then also the 5-string guitar. We use a 6-string guitar traditionally in this country. As far as literature goes, literature did develop in Northeast Africa, so some societies came in contact with the Mediterranean systems of writing, so that would be like the Greek or the Latin. So modern literature, however, includes the works of Nafisato Niang Diallo. I hope I said that right. 1975 biography was one of the first to be published by a Senegalese woman. Okay, so it's kind of a biography of her life. And then oral literature is either chanted, sung, or recited, but a lot of African history was passed down by oral tradition. So this is where you pass down by word of mouth, then by writing it down. And so this is why we don't know a lot of African history. One of the reasons. So one reason is they didn't write it down. Another reason is when the Europeans came in to colonize, they got rid of a lot of African culture and history, and so that's another big reason too. So, okay, so family life. So most Africans value strong family ties. In the rural areas, most of them live with their extended family, so not just mom and dad and kids, but the extended family would include like aunts, uncles, cousins, grandmas, grandpas. But most families are patriarchal, which means in this region are patriarchal, which means they're headed by a male family member. But in many of the more ancient societies, they were more matriarchal. And we'll talk about some areas of Africa as we go through that are more matriarchal. So as a result of this, women actually are much more involved in supporting the family than they were traditionally in like more Western civilizations. But many families are organized into clans. So clans are large groups of people who are descended from an early common ancestor. People often marry within their clan, even though they do have a common ancestor. Oftentimes it's so far back that it's hard to tell who's related and who's not. But in the cities, most people live with their nuclear family, so that would be mom, dad, kids. And that's replacing the extended family in the cities. Language and religion. So hundreds of ethnic groups speak several African language groups. So these are language groups. These are not necessarily African languages. So the Afro-Asiatic, which is a blending of African language with the Asian, the Nilo-Saharan, which would be from the Nile River Valley and the Saharan, the Con-Kordofanian, which is more of a Central African language family. French is spoken in Sudan, and French is often what is known as a lingua franca, which is a common language. So because the French controlled a lot of this region, when they controlled it, they made people learn their language. And so in a lot of places, if you speak French or English, they know what you're saying. Islam is the predominant religion in this region. You can see that this right here on this map here, this is kind of the line here of the Sahel region. And so Islam this is like the southern tip of it. So it is predominant, but Christianity is also practiced in Chad, Sudan, Niger, and Senegal, as you can see here. And so many ethnic groups have also maintained indigenous religions as well. Okay, so education, so school enrollment and literacy rates are very low. These are some of the poorest countries in the world that we're talking about. So Niger and Mali, only about 1/3 of the kids even go to school. So their literacy rates obviously are even lower than that. But some countries, few children even are able to go to elementary school, and oftentimes it's because the parents are too poor to send them. They don't have a way to send them. Okay, so oftentimes they just have buses that go pick them up like we do here, and so governments are working on trying to find ways to increase school enrollment. As far as healthcare goes, poverty is a key factor in access to healthcare. So if you're more poor, you're not going to get as good of healthcare. And like I said, these are some of the poorest countries in the world. But there's major health concerns related to poverty. So like high mortality rates, infectious disease, but things like having clean water to drink and proper sanitation. Those kinds of things are really causing a lot of people to get sick in a lot of these areas. Also, lack of adequate care in childbirth results in high female and infant mortality rates. But a small number of rural Africans have access to clean water, like I just said. So a lot of these people, they're not drinking clean enough water, and so they're getting sick as a result of that. All right, that's all I have for you today. And don't forget to do your processor. I'll see you guys later.